A wife's cruel games with her manservant backfire, leading to a dangerous affair. But when her husband discovers the truth, chaos ensues. And if you cherish your family and love videos like this, subscribe to our channel to have 10 years of luck in your life. The late evening air was thick with tension as Veronica Reed's Mercedes pulled into the circular driveway of her Georgian mansion. The click of her designer heels echoed against the marble floor as she entered, still riding high from her successful charity gala appearance. Her face held the satisfied smirk of someone accustomed to being the center of attention. Jamal Carter stood at attention near the grand staircase, his posture perfect in his well-maintained but clearly old uniform. His eyes remained downcast as protocol demanded, but there was an unmistakable intelligence behind them that Veronica had never bothered to notice before. He stepped forward to take her coat, his movements precise and practiced. "I see you're still wearing that same uniform, Jamal," Veronica commented, her voice dripping with mock concern. "I do hope you own more than one, though I suppose on your salary, that might be asking too much." She watched his reaction carefully, expecting the usual submissive response. The other household staff purposefully busied themselves in different rooms, aware of how these interactions typically played out. Veronica's games were a regular occurrence, and everyone knew their roles. The cleaning lady quietly slipped into the kitchen, while the gardener, who had been arranging flowers in the foyer, suddenly found urgent work outside. Jamal's response was measured, his voice steady. "The uniform meets all household standards, Mrs. Reed." He maintained his professional demeanor, but his fingers tightened slightly on the expensive coat he was hanging. The simple gold band on his right hand caught the light, a detail Veronica had never noticed before. In the kitchen, Jamal methodically began his evening routine, checking the next day's menu and organizing the staff schedules. His education degree from Howard University sat folded in his wallet, a reminder of dreams temporarily set aside. The kitchen, with its industrial-grade appliances and marble countertops, was his domain after hours, a place where he could think without the weight of scrutiny. Veronica found herself lingering in the adjoining dining room, ostensibly reviewing place settings for tomorrow's lunch. Her eyes kept drifting to the kitchen door, watching Jamal's efficient movements through the gap. For the first time, she noticed how he carried himself, not with the stooped posture of someone beaten down, but with the contained dignity of someone who chose his battles carefully. The interaction had left her unsettled, though she couldn't pinpoint why. Usually, her barbs gave her a sense of power, of control. Tonight, they felt hollow, almost childish. She observed how Jamal handled the expensive china with expert care, how he spoke quietly but confidently with the other staff members, how his presence seemed to command respect despite his position. The household settled into its nighttime routine, but something had shifted. Veronica's usual satisfaction at asserting her dominance was replaced by an unfamiliar feeling of curiosity. Who was this man who could absorb her insults without losing his composure? What made him choose this life when his bearing suggested he could be doing so much more? As she prepared for bed in her wing of the mansion, Veronica caught herself thinking about the quiet strength in Jamal's eyes when he'd responded to her taunt. It was the first time she'd really looked at them, and what she saw there didn't match the narrative she'd constructed about him. The realization made her uncomfortable, like finding a crack in a foundation you'd always assumed was solid. The evening ended with both of them in their respective spaces. Veronica in her luxury suite, Jamal in his modest staff quarters. But the dynamic between them had imperceptibly begun to change. Neither could have predicted how this subtle shift would eventually upend their carefully ordered world. The mansion buzzed with activity as guests and designer evening were filtered through the grand ballroom. Veronica stood at the center of it all, wearing a crimson Valentino gown that cost more than most people's monthly salary. She orchestrated the evening with practiced precision, every laugh and gesture calculated for maximum social impact. Jamal moved through the crowd like a shadow, efficiently managing the serving staff while maintaining the illusion that everything happened by magic. The crystal glasses remained full, empty plates disappeared, and hors d'oeuvres circulated with seamless timing. He had transformed the service operation into a silent symphony. "Jamal," Veronica called out loudly, cutting through a lull in conversation. Do tell Mrs. Vandenberg about that charming little incident with the wine cellar inventory. She smiled sweetly, but her eyes held a challenge. The surrounding guests turned to watch, anticipating entertainment at the servant's expense. Instead of shrinking from the attention, Jamal straightened his shoulders and addressed Mrs. Vandenberg directly. The estate's wine collection requires careful cataloging, madam. Each bottle has its own story. His voice carried a quiet authority that made several guests lean in to listen. For instance, the 82 Lafayette Rothschild you're enjoying has notes of cedar and blackcurrant due to that year's unique growing conditions. Mrs. Vandenberg looked impressed, and Veronica felt her planned humiliation backfire. She watched as Jamal smoothly excused himself, leaving several guests murmuring appreciatively about his knowledge. The moment left her feeling oddly off balance. After the last guest departed, the real work began. Jamal directed the cleanup with quiet efficiency, while Veronica found herself lingering in the ballroom instead of retiring upstairs. The sound system still played softly, a jazz piece she didn't recognize. "Coltrane," Jamal said, noticing her attention to the music. "A Love Supreme, one of his masterworks." He continued collecting glasses, maintaining professional distance despite the personal observation. "You know jazz?" Veronica asked, surprise evident in her voice. The question came out genuinely curious rather than condescending for once. "Music, art, literature, they belong to everyone who takes the time to understand them," he replied, stacking plates with practiced care. "Beauty doesn't recognize social boundaries." The conversation shifted into an unexpected discussion about their favorite composers. Veronica discovered that Jamal had played saxophone in college, while she revealed her abandoned dreams of becoming a concert pianist. The formal barriers between them seemed to thin in the late-night quiet. As they talked, Veronica noticed details she'd overlooked before. How Jamal's references range from classical philosophy to contemporary art. How he spoke about European architecture with first-hand knowledge from his traveling years. How his observations about the evening's guests revealed sharp psychological insight. The realization that her servant might be more culturally sophisticated than many of her wealthy guests left Veronica feeling unsettled. The careful hierarchies she'd constructed began to show hairline cracks. When their hands briefly touched while reaching for the same champagne flute, the contact sent an unexpected jolt through her system. Their conversation flowed naturally until reality intruded in the form of approaching footsteps, other staff members returning to finish the cleanup. Jamal smoothly stepped back into his professional role, but something had changed. The air between them felt charged with possibilities neither of them was ready to acknowledge. In the weeks following the party, the mansion's atmosphere grew thick with unspoken tension. Jamal began taking longer routes through the house to avoid casual encounters with Veronica, focusing intently on tasks that kept him in the service areas. His clipboard became a shield, his schedules an excuse to maintain distance. Yet Veronica found increasingly creative reasons to be where Jamal worked. She moved her morning coffee ritual to the kitchen instead of her usual sunroom. She developed a sudden interest in personally checking the wine cellar inventory. Each interaction was wrapped in the pretense of household management, but her questions strayed beyond servant-employer boundaries. "Where did you learn to speak French?" she asked one morning, having overheard him on the phone with a wine merchant. "What made you choose this line of work?" "Another day. Do you ever regret not pursuing your degree?" The questions came faster than Jamal could construct safe answers. During an afternoon garden consultation, Laura Spencer, Veronica's closest friend since college, noticed her distraction. They sat on the terrace, untouched tea growing cold between them. "You're playing with fire, V," Laura warned, watching Veronica's eyes track Jamal's movements across the lawn. "I've known you 20 years. I recognize that look." "What look?" Veronica snapped too quickly. "I'm simply ensuring the staff performs to standards." Laura set down her cup with deliberate care. "Thomas may be obsessed with his business empire, but he's not blind, and he's not known for his forgiveness." She leaned forward, lowering her voice. "Remember what happened to his first wife?" Veronica waved away the concern, but her hand trembled slightly. "You're imagining things. Jamal is he's just intriguing. Different from what I expected. That's exactly what makes him dangerous, Laura replied. The heart doesn't care about social boundaries, but society does. So does your husband. Later that evening, Veronica found herself alone in the library with Jamal as he updated the catalog of first editions. The rain outside drummed against the windows, creating an intimate cocoon of sound. She watched him work, noting how his fingers traced the spines with reverence. "These were my father's," she said softly. "He loved books more than people sometimes." Jamal looked up, caught off guard by the personal disclosure. "Books are easier," he replied. "They don't judge, don't have expectations. They just offer themselves, asking only that you understand them." Their eyes met, and for a moment, the air seemed to crackle with possibility. Jamal took an involuntary step forward, then caught himself. The movement sent a book tumbling from the shelf. They both reached for it, fingers brushing. Neither pulled away immediately. "Mrs. Reed," Jamal began, his voice rough with suppressed emotion. "Veronica," she corrected automatically, still not moving. The sound of a door opening somewhere in the house broke the spell. They jumped apart, Jamal retreating behind his professional mask. Veronica smoothing her expression into practiced neutrality. But something had shifted irrevocably between them. That night, neither slept well. Jamal paced his small room above the garage, wrestling with feelings he'd sworn never to entertain. Veronica lay awake in her massive bedroom, Thomas's steady breathing beside her a reminder of everything she stood to lose. The mansion's shadows held their secrets, but for how long? Thomas Reed's study had always projected power. Dark oak panels, leather-bound books, and the lingering scent of expensive cigars. Tonight, he stood at the window, watching his wife in the garden below. Veronica moved differently lately. There was a lightness to her step he hadn't seen in years. It made him uneasy. "Harrison," he spoke into his phone, "I need a complete background check on Jamal Carter. Everything: education, employment, family connections, criminal record. Especially any financial irregularities." He paused, eyes narrowing as he watched Jamal appear in the garden, maintaining a careful distance from Veronica while discussing the rose arrangements. "And Harrison? Be discreet." Across town, in a dingy bar far from the mansion's manicured lawns, Marcus Johnson nursed a bourbon and waited. When Jamal walked in, the years seemed to melt away. They were kids again, running the streets of Baltimore, sharing impossible dreams. "You always did aim high, Jay," Marcus said after they'd exchanged greetings. "But a white woman? The wife of Thomas Reed?" He shook his head. "Have you forgotten what happened with the Robertson account?" Jamal's face hardened. "That was different. I was young, desperate. I've paid for those mistakes." "Have you? Because from where I'm sitting, you're about to make an even bigger one." Marcus leaned forward. "Reed has people everywhere. He already knows about Baltimore." The warning hung heavy between them. Jamal's past, the desperation that had led him to participate in a financial scam, the careful work of rebuilding his life, suddenly felt like a noose tightening around his neck. That evening, the mansion's extensive grounds provided cover for another chance encounter. Veronica had taken to walking the paths after dinner, knowing Jamal checked the security lights at dusk. They met by the old fountain, its trickling water masking their conversation from any listening ears. "I dream of Paris sometimes," Veronica confessed, staring at the moon's reflection in the water. "Of walking the Seine, anonymous among strangers. No expectations, no reputation to maintain." She glanced at him. "Do you ever dream of escape?" Jamal stood close enough to catch the scent of her perfume, far enough to maintain plausible deniability. "Dreams are dangerous things, Mrs. Reed. They make us forget the price of reality." "And what is the price of reality, Jamal?" She turned to face him fully. The moonlight carved shadows across her face, making her look younger, more vulnerable. Jamal fought the urge to brush a strand of hair from her cheek. "Higher than either of us can afford to pay." Their conversation was interrupted by the sudden illumination of the patio lights. Thomas stood at the French doors, his silhouette sharp and threatening. Jamal melted into the shadows while Veronica walked with forced casualness toward the house. Later, in the quiet of his room, Jamal pulled out an old photo, himself in a business suit, standing proudly in front of an investment firm's logo. Before the scandal, before the lies caught up with him, before he learned that second chances come with their own kind of chains, the attraction between them had become a tangible thing, dangerous and intoxicating. But with Thomas's suspicious eyes and Marcus's warnings echoing in his mind, Jamal realized they were all balanced on a knife's edge. The morning calm in the mansion shattered with the sound of Thomas's fist hitting his desk. Papers scattered, detailed reports about Jamal's past lay exposed. His voice, when he finally spoke, carried the controlled fury of a man used to destroying obstacles. 7 years ago, Baltimore Investment Trust. Nearly $500,000 missing. No charges filed, but resignation accepted. Thomas traced the words with his finger. Tell me, Jamal, did you think I wouldn't find out? That your little redemption story would protect you? Jamal stood rigidly before the desk, his face a careful mask. I've never hidden my past, Mr. Reed. Every employer since then has known. But did my wife know? Thomas's smile didn't reach his eyes. Does she know she's been confiding in a thief? He stood, moving around the desk. Here's what's going to happen. You'll leave, quietly, immediately, or I'll make sure everyone knows exactly who you are. Meanwhile, Veronica burst into the room, her face flushed. She'd overheard enough to understand the situation was unraveling. Thomas, stop this. Whatever you think is happening, think. Thomas turned on his voice deadly quiet. I don't think, Veronica. I know. The late-night conversations, the lingering looks, the convenient meetings in the garden. He stepped closer to her. Did you really believe you could fool me? I own half this city. Nothing happens here without my knowledge. Veronica felt her carefully constructed world beginning to crack. You've been having me followed? I've been protecting my interests, Thomas corrected. Like I always have, like I did with Catherine. The mention of Thomas's first wife hung in the air like poison. Veronica knew the stories. How Catherine had lost everything in the divorce. How she'd left the country in disgrace. The threat was clear. Jamal moved forward instinctively when he saw fear flash across Veronica's face, but Thomas's sharp look stopped him. Your concern for my wife is touching, Thomas sneered, but unnecessary. Veronica understands exactly what's at stake. Don't you, dear? Veronica felt herself shrinking under Thomas's gaze, years of emotional manipulation taking their toll. Thomas, please. You have until tomorrow morning, Thomas told Jamal, turning back to his desk in dismissal. After that, I make everything public. Your past, your relationship with my wife, everything. I'm sure the police would be interested in reopening the Baltimore case. Jamal looked at Veronica one last time, seeing the conflict in her eyes, before turning to leave. The weight of his past mistakes had finally caught up with him, threatening to destroy not just his future, but hers as well. Outside the study, Jamal began mentally preparing for departure. He'd rebuilt his life once, he could do it again. But leaving Veronica felt different, like tearing out a vital part of himself. The day stretched on, heavy with unspoken words and impossible choices. Veronica wandered the mansion like a ghost, while Thomas made phone calls, methodically ensuring Jamal would never work in their social circle again. Laura's townhouse, with its modern art and mismatched furniture, provided a stark contrast to the Reed mansion's oppressive grandeur. She opened the door to find Jamal standing there, his few possessions packed in a single bag. I wasn't sure you'd come, Laura said, stepping aside to let him in. Though I hoped you would. It's safer than a hotel. Thomas won't think to look here. Jamal hesitated at the threshold. Why are you helping me? You're Veronica's friend. Exactly. Laura's face hardened. And I've watched Thomas destroy her piece by piece for years, just like he did with Catherine. She led Jamal to her guest room. What he doesn't know is that Catherine was my friend too, before she disappeared. The guest room was small but comfortable. Jamal set his bag down, looking around. What happened to Catherine? Really? Laura poured 2 glasses of wine, settling into an armchair. Catherine found evidence of Thomas's illegal dealings, money laundering, corporate espionage. She threatened to expose him. Next thing we knew, she was being painted as mentally unstable. Lost custody of her daughter. Her reputation was ruined. And you think he'd do the same to Veronica? I know he would. Laura took a long sip. Thomas doesn't lose. Ever. He's already laying the groundwork, suggesting to our friends that Veronica's been acting erratic, hinting at possible substance abuse. Jamal absorbed this information, his jaw tightening. I should leave the city. Give them a chance to repair their marriage. Their marriage isn't the problem, Laura countered. Thomas's control is. And you're the first thing in years that's made Veronica question it. Meanwhile, at the mansion, Veronica discovered Jamal's departure through whispered conversations among the staff. Her first instinct was to call Laura, but she stopped herself. Laura had been acting strange lately, distant, almost guilty. When her phone buzzed with a text from Laura, Veronica's suspicions crystallized. The message was casual, too. Casual. Haven't heard from you today. Everything okay? Laura never texted like that. She called, always called. Understanding dawned. Laura knew something. Was possibly involved somehow. You knew. Veronica confronted Laura over the phone hours later. You've been helping him. Listen dash. No, you listen. I trusted you. Does Thomas know you're harboring him? Of course not, Laura snapped. I'm not doing this for Jamal. I'm doing it for you. For Catherine. For every person Thomas has systematically destroyed. The line went quiet. Finally, Veronica spoke, her voice barely a whisper. He's there with you, isn't he? Yes. Another long pause. Keep him safe. The call ended, leaving both women with a weight of unspoken words. In Laura's guest room, Jamal sat on the edge of the bed, holding a worn photograph of himself and his mother from before everything went wrong in Baltimore. Choices made years ago were still shaping his present, but now they threatened more than just his own future. The next morning, Veronica stormed into Laura's townhouse uninvited, her composure cracking. The sight of Jamal's jacket draped over a chair stopped her mid-stride. So it's true. You've been hiding him. Laura stood her ground. Someone had to do something. You don't know everything about Thomas. And you do. Veronica's laugh was bitter. Because you were such good friends with Catherine? You barely knew her. I knew her well enough to be the last person to speak to her before she disappeared. Laura's voice shook. Well enough to know what Thomas made her endure. Well enough to have spent the last 5 years trying to find her. The revelation hung heavy in the air. Jamal, hearing the confrontation from upstairs, stayed hidden but listened intently. What are you talking about? Veronica demanded. Laura moved to a locked drawer, pulled out a thick folder. Catherine found documents, proof of Thomas's connections to organized crime, money laundering through his construction projects. She came to me the night before she supposedly had her breakdown. She spread photographs across the coffee table. Catherine with bruises she'd claimed were from accidents, bank statements showing suspicious transfers, newspaper clippings about disappeared whistleblowers. Veronica sank into a chair, her world tilting. Why didn't you tell me? Because Catherine tried to tell you. All of you. Nobody believed her. Laura's voice was thick with old guilt. Thomas had already poisoned everyone against her. By the time I understood what was happening, she was gone. Meanwhile, through his own investigation, Jamal had made a discovery that chilled him. His old firm in Baltimore, the one where he'd taken the fall for the missing money, had been owned by a shell company. A shell company tied to Thomas Reed. Your husband set me up, Jamal said, finally descending the stairs. The whole thing, the missing money, the scandal. It was his operation. Veronica looked between them, pieces falling into place. The background check Thomas ran on you. You already knew everything. He was making sure you hadn't figured it out. And now he's doing to you what he did to Catherine, Laura added softly, creating a paper trail of instability, setting the stage for your downfall. Veronica's phone buzzed. Another message from Thomas asking about her erratic behavior and suggesting she seek help. Each word now read like a carefully crafted threat. There's more, Laura hesitated. Catherine, I think she found proof of something bigger, something worth killing for. The night she disappeared, she said she was going to confront Thomas with evidence that would destroy him. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. Jamal moved closer to Veronica, propriety forgotten in the face of genuine fear. We need to be careful, very careful. Too late for that, Veronica whispered, showing them her phone. Thomas had texted again, coming home early. We need to discuss your future and Jamal's past. The decision to run came suddenly, like a dam breaking. Veronica moved through her bedroom methodically, packing essentials while dodging Thomas's increasingly frequent calls. Her hands shook as she grabbed her passport, emergency cash, and the flash drive containing copies of Thomas's private files, insurance she'd never thought she'd need. But Jamal had already made his choice. "I won't let you throw everything away," he told Laura, packing his meager belongings. "Thomas is too powerful, too connected. I need to leave the city tonight." Laura watched him prepare for departure with growing frustration. "So, you're just going to abandon her? Like everyone else has?" "I'm protecting her," Jamal insisted, but his voice lacked conviction. "No," Laura countered. "You're running, just like you did in Baltimore." The words hit their mark. Jamal stilled, his past and present colliding painfully. Veronica arrived at Laura's townhouse just as Jamal was heading out the door. Their collision in the hallway felt symbolic, two people caught between escape and confrontation. "Don't," Veronica said simply, her hand catching his arm. The touch sent electricity through both of them. "He'll destroy you," Jamal warned, but didn't pull away. "He's already trying." Veronica's voice was steady despite her fear. "But I'm not Catherine. I won't disappear quietly." The tension in the room was broken by Laura's sharp intake of breath. She stood by her laptop, face pale. "You need to see this," she said, turning the screen toward them. On display was an email thread, correspondence between Thomas and unknown parties, discussing handling Catherine's interference permanently. The timestamps matched the week of her disappearance. "Where did you get this?" Jamal asked, scanning the damning messages. Catherine sent copies to multiple secured accounts. Time released. Laura's hands trembled. She knew Veronica. She knew what he was capable of. Veronica felt the world shift beneath her feet. The man she'd married, who controlled every aspect of their lives, was more dangerous than she'd imagined. The pretense of their marriage felt like a mask covering something monstrous. "There's more," Laura continued. "Financial records, offshore accounts, evidence of systematic fraud." Catherine didn't just stumble onto one crime. She uncovered an empire built on them. The sound of car doors slamming outside made them all freeze. Through the window, they could see Thomas's security detail taking positions around the townhouse. "Back door," Laura commanded, already moving. "There's a garage entrance through the basement. Take my car." But Jamal stood his ground, years of running suddenly weighing too heavy. "No more running," he said quietly. "It's time to face this." Veronica looked between the escape route and the man who'd awaken her conscience. The choice crystallized with surprising clarity. "Together then," she said, taking his hand. The tension in Laura's living room could have been cut with a knife as Thomas entered, flanked by two security guards. His expensive suit and perfectly composed demeanor contrasted sharply with the chaos he'd created. "Quite the gathering," he observed coldly. "My wife, my employee, and the devoted friend. How convenient." His eyes landed on the open laptop, and something dangerous flickered across his face. "It's over, Thomas," Veronica stated, her voice stronger than she felt. "We know about Catherine, about Baltimore, all of it." Thomas's laugh was chilling. "Know what, exactly? That Catherine had mental health issues? That Mr. Carter here has a criminal record? Old news, my dear." "We have the emails," Laura interjected. "The financial records. Everything Catherine found before you made her disappear." For a fraction of a second, Thomas's mask slipped. "Careful, Laura. Accusations of murder are serious things, especially without proof." Jamal stepped forward, positioning himself slightly in front of Veronica. "The Baltimore setup was sloppy, Mr. Reed. You left traces. Shell companies leading back to your holding firms. Money trails that don't quite disappear. And you think anyone will believe a convicted fraudster?" Thomas's voice dripped with contempt. "A man having an affair with my wife? Please." "They'll believe the evidence," Veronica countered. "All those careful records you kept? I've been copying them for months. Insurance, I told myself. Now I know it was instinct." Thomas's composure cracked further. He nodded to his guards, who moved to block the exits. "This can end one of two ways," he said quietly. Either you all sign non-disclosure agreements and disappear, with generous compensation, of course, or you let the threat hang unfinished. Or what? Veronica challenged. We have accidents? Go crazy? Disappear like Catherine? Don't test me, Veronica. Thomas's voice was deadly quiet. You have no idea what I'm capable of. Actually, Jamal interrupted. We do. He pulled out his phone, showing a video call in progress. On the screen was a face Thomas clearly recognized. His expression turned from confidence to shock. Hello, Thomas. Catherine's voice came through the speaker. It's been a while. The room froze. Thomas stared at the screen, his carefully constructed world beginning to unravel. This is impossible, he whispered. Laura found me, Catherine explained. 6 months ago. We've been building the case ever since. The FBI is very interested in your business practices, Thomas. As if on cue, sirens became audible in the distance. Thomas's guards exchanged uncertain looks, their loyalty wavering in the face of federal intervention. Veronica felt a moment of vertigo as her world shifted again. The truth was finally emerging, but with it came a devastating revelation that would change everything. One that even Catherine didn't know. The sound of approaching sirens grew louder as Veronica pressed her hand to her stomach, a gesture that didn't go unnoticed by anyone in the room. The timing couldn't have been worse, or perhaps more perfect. I'm pregnant, she announced, her voice cutting through the tension. And before you start calculating dates, Thomas, we both know it can't be yours. The room stilled as she continued. The fertility tests you kept hidden in your office drawer confirmed what the doctors told you years ago. Thomas's face contorted with rage and humiliation. You went through my private files? Like you went through everyone else's life? Veronica countered. But there was more. Something in her expression suggested another revelation waiting to be unveiled. Catherine's voice from the phone grew urgent. Veronica, there's something else you need to know. Something I found in Thomas's old records about Jamal's family. But Thomas's bitter laugh interrupted her. Go ahead, Catherine. Tell them. Tell them how Jamal's mother used to work for my father's company. How she disappeared after threatening to expose corporate fraud. Like mother, like son, wouldn't you say? Jamal froze, old memories suddenly realigning. My mother didn't abandon us, he said slowly, the truth dawning. Your family, made her disappear. And then you hired me. Jamal continued, pieces falling into place. You knew exactly who I was. The Baltimore setup wasn't just about money laundering. It was about keeping me under control, making sure I never discovered the truth. Thomas's composed facade finally shattered completely. Everything I built, everything my father built, I couldn't let it all come crashing down because of idealistic fools who didn't understand how the world works. The FBI agents burst in at that moment, filling Laura's townhouse with organized chaos. As Thomas was being read his rights, Catherine's voice came through the phone again. Jamal, your mother is alive. I found her 2 months ago in witness protection. She's been waiting for this day. Veronica reeked, head for Jamal's hand as he absorbed this news, their fingers intertwining. The child growing inside her represented more than just their love. It was a chance to break the cycle of secrets and corruption, to build something honest from the ashes of lies. Laura watched as her friend's face transformed, years of subtle fear falling away. You're finally free, she told Veronica softly. We all are, Veronica replied, looking at Jamal, who was still processing the news about his mother. As Thomas was led away, he turned back one last time. You'll never prove everything, he said, but his voice had lost its power. We don't need to prove everything, Catherine responded through the phone. Just enough. Hours later, as dawn broke over the city, Veronica and Jamal stood in Laura's garden. The chaos had subsided, replaced by a quiet understanding of how completely their lives had changed. A baby, Jamal said softly, his hand resting on Veronica's stomach. A fresh start. With no mansions, no servants, no social hierarchies, Veronica added. Just us figuring it out together. And my mother, Jamal smiled, tears in his eyes. A family reunion I never thought possible. The sun rose fully, casting long shadows behind them and bright light ahead. a fitting metaphor for their path forward. The social barriers that once seemed so insurmountable had crumbled, replaced by something far more precious: truth, justice, and the promise of a love that had survived its ultimate test.